Eliezer was 19. The spring he taught Lee to read the field. He was 19 and Lee was 11 and Micah was 8. And the three of them came down the road on a borrowed donkey because the boy who had borrowed the donkey could not yet afford one of his own. And the girl behind him was holding the bundle. And the smaller boy was holding the girl. And the donkey was holding all three of them with the patience donkeys have when they have decided that the children on their back are not going to fall, but might. I was at the gate when they came. I had been at the gate since the sun came over the wall because Mara had said they will come today on 3 different mornings, and on the 3rd morning I had stopped arguing. Mara stood in the doorway with a cloth in her hand because there had been bread in the oven, and she had needed an excuse to come outside without admitting she had been watching the road for an hour. "Abba," Eliezer called. He still called me that. He had taught his voice to address other men in 6 ways, father to merchants, bobber at synagogues, or to old men whose names he had not yet been given. But at the gate of our house he called me Abba, the small old word for the small old fact, and I had not yet stopped wanting him to. "Eliezer, this is Lee." Lee looked at me from behind her brother's elbow. She had a serious face and a dust-streaked cheek and a piece of hair the wind had been working at for hours and would never be done with. She did not look afraid. She looked careful. There is a difference. Afraid is what a child does when the road has been bad. Careful is what a child does when the road has been long and the people at the end of it have been talked about for years. And this is Micah. Micah was looking at the field. He had heard the introductions and registered that he was being named, and his small body had done what small bodies do, squared toward the speaker for half a breath, then drifted toward the mustard along the southern wall. He had been told the mustard was the point of the trip, and a boy of 8 who has been told the mustard is the point will look at the mustard before he looks at the man. "Welcome," I said. That came out wrong somehow, too formal. Mara would mock me for it later. Mara mocked me whenever I tried to be ceremonial in my own yard. Mara saved me. She came down off the step with the cloth still in her hand, and held out her arms, and Lee went to her without being asked. And Micah followed Lee without being told. And Eliezer slid off the donkey and did the awkward dance a tall son does with his short mother, where he stoops just enough to be hugged and not so much that he insults her height. And Mara kissed the top of his ear because that was the place she had been kissing him, since he was tall enough to require kissing the ear instead of the head. Then she looked at the field. "You have not pulled the long row." "No, it needed pulling 4 days ago. I was waiting for the children." She looked at me the way she had been looking at me for 30 years. "You were waiting for the children so that you could teach them while you pulled it." "Yes, old man, yes. Go pull it." The donkey was unloaded. The bundles were brought into the house. Mara's bread came out of the oven exactly when Mara's bread always came out of the oven, which was the moment a guest sat down at the table for the first time. Mara had been timing bread to guests for 40 years. She was better at it than any sundial. After bread, I took the children into the field. Eliezer came too, but he came as a son comes home, with his hands in his belt and the smile of a man who had walked his way back into the geometry of his own childhood, and was watching to see whether the geometry still held. The mustard was a working field now. 3 rows of the early variety, 4 of the bigger Cyrenian, 2 of the heavy-seeded one that ground better but flowered slower. Gourds along the eastern wall, onions in the corner where the soil had thanked us for the chicken bones, and a small block of beans Mara had taken to herself because the beans did not trust me. The field had become a business. That was the part I had not been able to explain to Lee and Micah in any letter Eliezer had carried back to them, because the part of the field that had become a business was not the part of the field that you could see. The seen part of the field was a field. The business part was the small bundle of stitched accounts Mara kept on a peg in the lean-to, and the jars labeled in 3 different hands, and the boundary stone on the western corner that we had paid a stonecutter to deepen the marks of last winter, and the road memory Eliezer had been accumulating for 6 years about which markets in which towns took our mustard at what price, and which middleman shorted by how much. The field was the field. The business was the order of the work around the field, the labels, the marks, the routes, the accounts, the names of buyers, and the rule for which season we sold and which season we held. You could not hand the field down by deeding the soil. The soil was easy. The order around the soil was the hard thing. I had not known that until now. I had thought foolishly for a long time that what I had to leave my son was a piece of ground. The ground would be his when I died, the way ground had been my father's when his father had died, and so on, and the inheritance was the ground. But the ground had been the ground when I was 20 and broke and hungry on a road, and the ground had not fed me then because nobody had taught me the order around the ground. So a man's inheritance was not the ground. A man's inheritance was the order. I had not been able to teach Eliezer this in any single sentence. I had taught it slowly, the way Mara had taught it to him, by setting him to do a small thing and then a slightly larger thing, and praising the thing that mattered by leaving the room to draw water and trusting that he would handle it without me there, and coming back to find that he had. That was how Eliezer had become a man. Lee and Micah had not had that yet. Their father had died in Damascus. Their mother had survived him by a year and a half. They had been carried then by an uncle on their mother's side who was generous and overextended, and who had agreed to send them to us for a season because Mara had been their mother's friend in the city years ago, and because Eliezer had ridden up to him last spring with the kind of letter a young man writes when his own mother has dictated the first 3 sentences, and his own father has dictated the last 2. The letter had said, "We have land, work, food, room, and the question of seed." The uncle had read the letter twice. Then the uncle had sent the children. That was how a family was made from a road in the country I was from. You did not announce it. You sent a letter. The letter named what you had. The letter named the question. The receiving uncle decided. So Lee and Micah were now my children, not by adoption, by season. If they wanted to leave at the end of the season, they could. If they wanted to stay, they could. If they wanted to learn and then leave and then come back as adults, they could. Mara and I had agreed on this without discussing it. We had agreed on it the day Eliezer's letter had come back with the uncle's signature on it, and we had agreed on it again the morning of their arrival, and we would never speak of it aloud because aloud is how you put a fence around a thing, and a fence makes some children climb out. I knelt at the start of the long row. "Lee," I said. She came up next to me. "Watch." I closed my fingers around the base of a stalk where the leaves had begun to yellow. I pulled gently and steadily, neither tugging nor jerking, and the stalk came up with the taproot intact and shook off most of its dirt on the way up, and I held it in my hand and turned the root toward her. "What do you see?" She looked. "A root." "Yes, what about the root?" She looked again. "It is small." "Yes, and it has little hairs." "Yes, and the dirt is dark on the hairs." "Yes, good. Why is it small?" She thought about that. "Because the plant was not very old." "Yes." And because the soil was hard there." "How do you know?" "Because if the soil was soft, the root would have gone deeper." I looked at Mara across the field where she was standing with Micah, who had been given a small basket and the job of picking up the stalks we pulled. And Micah was already taking the job seriously, which is what Micah always did with jobs. And Mara was watching Micah without watching him, which is what Mara always did with children. "Eliezer," I said, "she is sharper than you were. She is sharper than I am now." He said it without rancor. He said it the way a brother says a thing about a sister he has chosen to keep. He had had a year and a half with Lee at this point, since the uncle, and another 6 months of letters before that. He had decided about her. I knelt longer. I taught Lee the long row. I taught her which stalks to pull and which to leave. I taught her the yellow that meant go and the yellow that meant wait 1 more week. I taught her where the soil went hard along the wall and why we put compost there in the autumn and why we did not in the spring. I taught her about the way the wind came over the western ridge in the middle of the 3rd hour and laid the small plants down without breaking them, and what we did about it. I taught her slowly with my hands and her hands and the dirt and the sun, the things I had been taught by Mara and by the soil and by 10 years of failing to get a mustard crop the size of the one I had on my hands now. I did not teach her in sentences. I taught her in stalks. That was the first rule of the order around the field. The order could not be sermonized. The order could only be done. Anyone who tried to teach the order in sentences taught a different thing. By the 3rd hour, she had pulled the last quarter of the long row by herself. Micah had filled 3 baskets and was on his way to a 4th. Mara had gone back to the house to put away the bread and start the 2nd loaf for tomorrow. Eliezer sat on the boundary stone in the western corner with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped, looking down the road we had come up that morning, and his face had the small, far-away look it got when he was thinking about a thing he had not yet told me. I went over to him. I sat on the wall beside the boundary stone. "What, Abba, what?" He was quiet a moment. "They are not going to leave." "No, you knew that already." Mara knew. I know what Mara knows after she knows it. He almost laughed. He did not laugh. "What do I owe them?" "Lee and Micah." "Yes, the same thing your mother owed you, which is, show them the order, let them choose whether they want the order. Do not pretend you are not showing them while you show them. That is not very specific." "No, it is not." He sat with that. "Abba, what?" "I do not want the field." I did not turn my head toward him too fast. I had learned over 30 years not to turn my head toward Eliezer too fast when he said something hard. He was not Mara, he was not me, he was his own person. If you turned your head fast, he would smooth the hard thing down before he had finished saying it, and then nobody would know what he had been about to say, and the conversation would be lost. So I looked at the field. I let the field hold my eyes. "What do you want?" I said. "I want to write letters. Not only letters. What else?" He breathed out. "I want to write down what people remember before the people who remember are dead." I sat with that. It was not a small thing. It was not a small thing because I had been waiting, secretly, in a place even Mara did not yet know I had built, for one of my children to say a sentence near that one. I had been waiting because the witnesses were getting old, and the rooms were getting older, and the men I had eaten breakfast with on a beach were not going to be on the beach forever. And somewhere in the country, the witnesses were going to start dying one by one with the things they had seen going down into the dust with them. And somebody was going to have to ask them, before that, what they had seen. But I had not wanted my son to be that somebody. That is the honest thing. I had wanted to keep my son here on the field with the dirt under his nails and the road far away. Because the road had eaten my father and his father, and I had broken the road only just in time, and a man who has broken a road does not want his son to walk back onto it, even when the road might be holy. Especially when the road might be holy. I did not say any of this. I said Mara will be angry. Mara already knows. Of course she does. She told me to tell you on the long row, not at supper. That sounds like her. We sat down the field. Micah was now arguing with the basket about whether one more stalk could go in. The basket was winning. "Lee," I said, "will run the field after me. With your help. With my help. And Micah's when he is older. And the accounts. Mara will teach her. And the road. I will teach her. I will keep the road until she is old enough to walk it alone, and then I will hand it to her. And the writing. I will start with the closest witnesses, the ones in the next 2 towns, the ones who are not going to last." I thought about it. I looked at Lee, who was walking back up the row with the last of the stalks under her arm. She had a small dirt smear on her chin where she had wiped it with the back of her hand. She would be a tall woman, I could already tell. The shoulders were going to be Mara's shoulders, the careful kind, the kind that carried bread baskets and grief without needing to be admired for the carrying. Her hands, when she pulled a stalk, had Mara's economy of motion. She could run a field. She could keep an order. She could also, I realized, do what Mara had done for me. She could keep a man from making the road into a god by the simple act of standing in the kitchen door with a cloth and waiting. If Eliezer was going to walk the road of the witnesses, he was going to need somebody at home. Lee was going to be that somebody. I had not known it until that morning. The morning had told me, the way mornings tell you things, by putting all the relevant facts in front of you and waiting for you to see them. "Eliezer, yes, take the small jar from the lean-to." "Which small jar?" "The one with the seal of your name on it. Mara wrote your name on it the year you were born." He went. He came back with the jar. It was small, the size of 2 fists, with a wax seal Mara had pressed with our thumbs the week he had been weaned. The seal had cracked a long time ago, and we had renewed it with new wax 3 or 4 times since, but the original thumbprints were still in the older layer underneath. I opened the jar. It was a third full of seed, the original seed. The mustard seed Jesus had pressed into my hand on the hillside above the feeding, the one I had carried all the years after without planting, that I had brought west out of Jerusalem in a pouch after the killing, and that Mara had finally planted at the end of the first autumn we had been in this house, and that we had been harvesting and replanting and selling and replanting and saving from for nearly 20 years now. We had kept a third of the original in this jar without touching it. Mara had said the original had to be unbroken. Some objects, she had said, you do not eat from, you only carry. This is yours, I said. Abba, you will take this when you walk. Abba, this is the seed. Yes. This is the seed. Yes. You should keep it. It is the field. The field is not the seed any longer. The field is the order. Lee will carry the order. You carry the seed. He looked at me. He looked at me a long time. Why, he said. Because writing what witnesses remember is also planting, and the witnesses are tired, and tired witnesses respond to a small thing in a man's hand more than they respond to a question. He closed the jar. The wax held. He held the jar in his two hands the way he had held himself the first time I had handed him to Mara when he had been a day old, when I had been afraid of dropping him by accident. He held the jar exactly that way. He had borrowed his own infant hands back from his memory to hold the jar. Abba, yes, you are giving me the wrong half. What do you mean? The wrong half. You are keeping the field, which is the body. You are giving me the seed, which is the spirit. That is not how a father should split an inheritance. That is how a prophet should. I looked at him a long time. Eliezer, yes, that is the kind of sentence you should write down. What sentence? The one you just said. Write that one down tonight, not in a letter, in your own book. Start tonight. I do not have a book. Mara will give you one. She has been keeping one in the chest by the wall for 2 years. His face did the slow surprise of a son finding out that his mother has been moving the furniture of his future without telling him. For 2 years. Mara saw this coming earlier than I did. She always does. She always does. He stood up off the wall. He held the jar against his chest. Lee, he called. Lee came up the row. This is the seed. She did not ask which seed. She had also been listening, the way young women always listen when there is an inheritance being discussed at a wall. You take care of the field, sister. Yes. I am going to walk where the witnesses are. Yes. You will not be alone. Mara is here. Abba is here. The field is here. The order is here. Micah is here, who will be tall in 5 years and useful in 3. Yes. And when I come back, I will come back with what they said. Yes. And we will eat together. Yes. That was the whole handoff. It did not look like an inheritance. It looked like a brother and a sister, 11 and 19, agreeing on a field in a country, with their parents nearby pretending not to be watching, and a small carved bird which Mara had brought out without telling me, sitting on the windowsill of the lean-to door because Mara had decided that the bird also had its place in this conversation. I had not known the bird was on the windowsill. I had not known Mara was watching. I should have known. I had been married to her for 30 years. That night, after Lee and Micah were asleep on the mat in the corner, after Eliezer had taken the book from the chest by the wall and gone outside to the bench under the eave to write his first sentence under a lamp that was not yet his lamp but soon would be, Mara sat down beside me by the small fire and put her shoulder against mine. He will write what he remembers, she said. And what others remember, and what others remember, and he will be killed for it somewhere if the wrong room hears. Yes, and the writing will outlast him. Yes, she breathed. Then we have done our work, she said. We have done our work. Tomorrow we begin again. Tomorrow we begin again. The lamp at the bench outside burned low. The bird on the windowsill watched the room. Lee breathed deep and even on her mat. Micah talked in his sleep about a basket. Eliezer wrote. I do not know what he wrote that night. He never showed me. He kept the book private until he died. After he died, Lee opened the book, and the first sentence said the thing he had said to me at the wall, and the second sentence said the thing he had not yet known he was going to say to Lee, and the third sentence said, Abba gave me the seed because Mara had been keeping the book. He had understood in a few months on the road that his inheritance had been a marriage. The book is in a chest in Lee's house now. Her children have read parts of it. Her children's children will read more. Some pages have been copied and carried. Some pages have not. Some of the witnesses Eliezer found are dead. Some he never found. Some are in the book under names. Some are in the book under a man, a widow, a woman in Capernaum who would not say her name but said the thing. Eliezer did not lie about any of them. Where he did not know, he wrote, I do not know, and where he doubted, he wrote, I doubt, and where he believed, he wrote, I believe, and that was the order of his writing, and it was the same order I had taught him in the long row when he had been a boy. A man's inheritance is the order. I gave my son the seed because the order was already his by Mara, by the field, by every supper for 19 years. The handoff was not a moment. The handoff was a marriage's worth of mornings, finally visible at a wall, on a day when a brother told his sister he was leaving, and the sister did not weep, because the sister had been raised to receive a field, and the brother had been raised to carry a seed, and the two of them had been raised to know that those were the same gift, split only for the road's sake. Mara stood up and banked the fire. "Old man, yes, come to bed." I came to bed. The lamp at the bench burned a while longer. When I woke once in the night to check the door, the lamp was still on, and my son was still bent over the book, and the bird on the windowsill of the lean-to door was still watching, and the field beyond was dark and full of mustard, and I lay back down beside Mara, and Mara,